welcome back for day 3. Are you ready to finish your dress today? Get your sleeve pattern and mark. I usually just put an X on the front of my sleeve, but however you keep track of what the front and what the back is. And then before we stitch the sleeve on, I think it's easier to go ahead and press the hem up a 1/2 inch. And even if it doesn't stay, you'll still have that crease, and it'll make it easier when you're actually stitching the hem in place. Okay. And then we're going to run just one E-stitch. An E-stitch is just a lengthened stitch, a straight stitch. You have X's on your pattern, so start and stop at the X. Comes the rain. Okay, so an E-stitch is just that. It's a way to pull up a little extra ease that's in the sleeve. Sometimes you don't even have to pull the thread, but if you find you're having trouble getting the sleeve into the armhole, just pull on the bobbin thread just a little bit. You don't want gathers because it's a straight sleeve. I'm going to pin this on. A lot of times I start with a couple of pins in the front or back, and then a couple of pins at the other side. Okay, it looks like I might need to pull that bobbin thread just a little bit. That'll pull it in that fullness just a little bit, and then it will fit perfect. Okay, for this stitch we're going to go back to the zigzag, and my machine remembers. Okay, and again, if you don't have a serger, just trim it neatly or use one of your optional stitches on your machine. Okay, I think we'll pause for a little while now while you get your sleeves put in your dress. Now that we're back, I hope that your sleeves went in easily and that you're ready now to gather your skirts. I have already put my gathering threads in. I didn't think you necessarily needed to see me do that, but I did do two along the top of each skirt panel. One fairly close to the top, 1/4 of an inch or so, and then the other one about 5/8 of an inch down. That way you have room for your half-inch seam allowance when we stitch the skirt to the bottom of the bodice. So, and if any of you out there don't know or haven't ever gathered before, you use a lengthened stitch, usually a 4 or a 5, and then you pull just the bobbin threads to pull up your gathers in your fabric, and then you're ready to pin it on. I usually try to get it pretty close to what I need, and then start pinning by putting a pin at one end and then the other end. And then we can just move the gathers around till they look even. Now, if you wanted to, before you started gathering, you could mark the center of your bodice at the bottom and the center of your fabric, and then start by pinning one in the center as well. I'm just usually in a hurry, and I just try to make it look as best as I can and move on. If this were something fancy, like a batiste dress or something that might be a little hard to judge the gathers if you didn't mark them, then I would. But most of the time, I just pin. So for this stitch, we're going to stay with a straight stitch. Remember, we have the interfacing at the bottom of the bodice, so we don't have to worry about our stitch threads breaking. And this isn't really a seam that will get a lot of pulling on it, unlike your sleeve. Okay, I think that should do it. If you still have your machine on a basting stitch, be sure to lower your stitch length back down to 2.5. Okay, so now before I trim the seam or finish the seam, it's always best to take a look at it because it's easy to catch fabric that you really didn't mean to catch. And believe me, I do it all the time. Okay, I think it looks good. I'm going to serge this, gather this, and put the other skirt on the back, and then we'll be back. Okay, I hope you didn't have any problems getting your skirts gathered and stitched on your bodice. Now we're ready. We're in the final stretch. We're going to do the side seams. Of course, right sides together. You'll want to match at the waist or at the bodice. Match that seam. Come up and match the seam of the sleeve, and then the bottom of the sleeve. And then all the way down the skirt. Just a couple more pins, and you can just stay on a straight stitch for this. So we'll stitch this, then we'll serge this side seam and do the next one. Okay, I'm going to serge this and do the other side seam, and we'll be back in just a second. Okay, now we're ready to hem the dress, and we'll also be hemming the sleeves. So I've worked with a lot of different things to figure out how to deal with this curling knit that feels so good. And just like we use the spray starch around the edges of our pieces, we are going to use spray starch around the bottom hem as well as the sleeve hem. I think it's really going to make your life easier than just trying to pin it. It sure made mine easier. So go through around the edge of your skirt and spray with spray starch, iron it dry. Yes, you might have to clean your iron by the time you're done with all this spray starch, but I promise it's worth it. So once you've sprayed it, gotten it dry, then and it should feel kind of stiff, you're going to go back and pin it. Turn your hem up anywhere from 3/4 to an inch and press it. Do that as you go. That'll also help it stay in place, and then pin it. But when you pin it like this. Pin it where the ball of your pen sticks out beyond the hem. And the reason for that is when we sew in a little while, we're going to be sewing with this side up using a twin needle. And you have to sew, when you use a twin needle, you have to sew with the right side of the fabric up because that's where you're going to see your threads. So get busy with your spray starch and your pinning. And when we come back, we'll talk about twin needles. Okay, we're getting close, almost the end. If you've never used a twin needle before, it's really easy. Take out your regular needle.
I thought this one and the one that we had out here was the same.
And put the twin needle in. Always remember the flat part of the top of the needle goes toward the back of the machine. And then I'm going to take my thread out, and then we need 2 spools of thread on the top. If you don't have 2 spools, what you can do is fill another bobbin with thread. And I know all machines thread differently, and you might want to look into your manual. It may give you specific directions for using a twin needle. I usually I usually thread the left needle first. Don't really know why, but just to be consistent. Wow, first time. Okay. Everything's threaded. We are on a straight stitch. I usually increase the stitch length to a 3 instead of a 2.5. I just think it looks a little nicer. And you might want to try with some scrap to see how your machine is going to like using a twin needle. Sometimes you have to adjust your tension. Usually if you have to adjust it, it's loosening it a little bit. What you want to try to avoid is a ridge. Sometimes between the 2 needles will be a raised ridge. And I'm hoping that, like with this, that having used the spray starch, that will also keep that ridge from coming up. As you sew, you can feel the edge of your hem, the bottom edge. So that's where you sew. Taking your pins out as you go. And this is going to take a while, so we will take a break and we will see you back in just a little bit. Okay, I hope you've all finished your project and enjoyed it. We've sure enjoyed it on this end. And when you finish your projects, please post them and keep calm and sew on.